conférencier est M. Jim Roche, président directeur général de CANARIE. Alors, il me fait plaisir de vous l'introduire. Jim Roche est un entrepreneur chevronné cumulant plus de 25 années d'expérience en leadership. Il est l'un des membres fondateurs, a été le directeur général de New Bridge Networks, a cofondé, été chef de la direction de Tundra Semiconductor, a dirigé CMC Microsystems et a fondé ainsi qu'assuré la direction de Stratford Managers. À ces fonctions, il convient d'ajouter sa participation à maints conseils et comités au ministère des Affaires étrangères et du Commerce international, au Conseil de recherche en sciences naturelles et en génie, au Conseil des académies canadiennes et bien d'autres. Enfin, vous avez vu ceux qui ont lu son CV, c'est un parcours assez impressionnant. Ce que j'aimerais vous dire, c'est que pour ma part, j'ai connu Jim au conseil d'administration de CANARIE et j'ai appris à apprécier son jugement et son leadership. Nous sommes privilégiés de compter sur un tel leader pour piloter le renouvellement du mandat de CANARIE. Mesdames et messieurs, Jim Roche, PDG de CANARIE.
Get the bright lights, I can barely see you, but it's a pleasure for me to be here. And Michel RISQ, thank you very much for the invitation to present to you today. I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of what CANARIE is, because not everybody knows the organization, what CANARIE does, why we exist. And then most importantly, I want to tell you what we're planning to do over the next 5 years. So let's begin. First, CANARIE, our primary objective is to improve the effectiveness of research in Canada. And as a consequence of implementing that objective, a secondary objective is to leverage our investments in support of education and innovation. But our number one objective, and we spend about 98% of our revenues over the last 5 years on this objective, is to increase the effectiveness of research in Canada. A secondary objective, about 2% of our resources in the last 5 years, are to accelerate the growth of Canada's ICT industry. So that's information and communication technologies industry. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the presentation. So that's why we exist, to do these two things. How do we do it? Well, like RISQ, we run a network. We connect over 1 million users at about 1,100 institutions across Canada. It's a fairly large network. It's 19,000 kilometers of fiber, about 100 gigabit, well, not about exactly, a maximum of 100 gigabit per second capacity. We operate links at 100 gigabit per second light wave, and we also have multiple 10 gigabit links at different parts of the network. Basically, it means lots and lots of bandwidth, very low latency. We also provide connections to countries around the world, so about 100 different countries with, of course, about 100 different peer networks, like Internet 2 in the United States or Géant in Europe. We work with our provincial partners like RISQ to connect every Canadian university, all of the big science facilities like Triumph, Neptune, the Canada Light Source, Snow Lab, all of the research hospitals and health networks in Canada, all the networks of centers of excellence, hundreds of CEGEPs and colleges, and a number of K-12 institutions as well, so kindergarten to grade 12 schools. Most of the money that we manage comes from the federal government. In the last 5 years, we received $120 million, and since we were started in 1993, we've received $470 million. So that's our primary function, is to run the network. The other thing that we do is fund programs that help researchers use the network. So it's good to have a high-speed network, but what we find is a lot of researchers who aren't involved in networking or in digital activities don't really necessarily have the expertise to utilize the network for their research. And so we funded projects to help those researchers access the network. And a great example of one of those projects is the CBrain initiative here in Montreal at McGill. And I know we have representatives of CBrain here in the audience. That's one of the 20 projects that we funded across Canada. And in that case, what they're doing is they're helping neurological researchers, brain researchers, to access large data sets to analyze brains both here in Canada, in McGill, as well as in collaborating universities across Canada and internationally. And it's this type of project that we're funding to help people leverage the resources that we've developed in partnership with RISQ and other provincial organizations across Canada. So, as I said, RISQ is an essential partner connecting over, well, you heard from Michel and Nancy Rancourt, connecting, I think it's over 140 institutions, if I heard you correctly, in Quebec. Michel already told you he's on our board of directors. What I don't think you mentioned, and I have to say I don't think because my French is really bad, so sitting there listening to you speak, Michel, what I heard was, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way, but blah, 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 CANARIE, blah, 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 CANARIE. And I didn't understand what you were saying in French because I just don't understand. So I felt like every time I heard CANARIE, it's like, oh, that's me. What did he say? So I don't know if you said this, but not only is Michel on our board of directors, Michel also chairs the ORAN Advisory Committee. So that is a committee made up of all of the provincial partners that CANARIE works with, of course, Quebec being one of the leading partners, that advises the board of directors on our future programs. And Michel does an excellent job chairing that committee, so thank you for that, Michel. In Quebec, CANARIE has had, well, we think we've had a significant impact. We've certainly tried to. As you know, we provide, through our network, access to national and international data, tools, and peers. All of the institutions that RISQ connects to, in turn, can connect through CANARIE to other institutions across Canada and internationally. We've funded projects that, like the one that I've just mentioned, like CBrain, to the tune of $4.5 million. We've also funded a green IT project that's been headquartered here in Montreal for $1.6 million. We do support some investments that RISQ is making in their core network. Over the last 4 years, that was to the tune of $3.1 million. And overall, the traffic from RISQ flowing across the CANARIE network represents about 15% of our traffic, our aggregate traffic. So that's a quick snapshot about what CANARIE does and why we do it. Well, you know, that's great. That's digital research. That's the digital research infrastructure for today. But really what I want to focus on during our conversation today is what we're planning to do tomorrow. Nancy had an excellent chart that showed the growth over the last 3 years of traffic, and if you averaged it out, it was a little bit less than 50% a year growth. CANARIE's seen the same trends. Over the last 5 years, our traffic growth has grown by 48% per year, and we're anticipating it will continue to grow at about 50% or so. We're rounding the numbers off. RISQ and CANARIE are not alone in this. Most research networks around the world are seeing this kind of growth. Of course, it's driven by Moore's Law, I suppose, but it's also driven by the increasing utilization of digital infrastructure in research and education around the world. The current network capacity that CANARIE is managing will begin to get congested, will begin to be exceeded mid-2012. So it's really imperative that we continue to make the investments in the core network over the next few years. So where do those investments come from? I told you that the majority of the money that we manage comes from the Government of Canada. In fact, we're given money in a 5-year mandate basis. So every 5 years, we apply to the federal government, in our case, Industry Canada. We make a case for why CANARIE should exist, why it increases the efficiency of the $5 billion a year or so that the government spends on research in Canada. And we ask them to continue the funding or to increase the funding for what CANARIE is doing. Our current mandate expires in about 6 months' time. And so we're working with our government partners, with Industry Canada, and of course with everyone else in the federal government, to encourage them to give us another mandate for 5 years. So as we do that, we're not just going forward saying, hey, networking is good, give us money. We're obviously proposing that we're going to do more than just build out the network. So I want to go over with you the 3 key components of what we're proposing for the next 5-year mandate. The first component is, of course, the network itself. Everything we do leverages the network itself. And as you saw from the slide that I showed a minute ago and the slide that you saw from Nancy earlier today, we need to continue to invest in capacity in order to meet the growing demand. So this one chart characterizes all of the things that we want to do to the network and with the network. First, the top, we want to build a pan-Canadian fiber network. Well, you might think, I thought you had a pan-Canadian fiber network. We do. What we want to do, though, is increase the capacity across Canada such that we have lit fiber that we manage from coast to coast to coast. That's a significant investment, and it would be akin to the last spike in the research network in Canada. So that's a significant investment. We're partway there, but over the next 5 years, we hope to finish that project. So that will increase the capacity to meet the growing demand. You heard Michel talk about wireless. At least I think you were talking about wireless. That's sans fil, right? So I know 2 words in French. We see a role for CANARIE in wireless networking as well. What exactly that role is, I'm not crystal clear. We have a number of programs in place right now. We're working with CIOs across Canada to evaluate the role that CANARIE can play. But as you know, wireless is the area of networking which is gaining the most investment internationally, and it only makes sense that research networks play a key role in that. Northern connections are important as well. CANARIE provides connections not only to universities across the south of Canada, but also to research institutions, colleges, and universities in the north. And as you know, it's becoming increasingly important that we protect our northern sovereignty. The research network is one mechanism for us to do that, and we're planning to make significant investments in providing increased bandwidth to the north as part of that Canadian initiative. I think you're all, or probably most of you, are aware of IPv6 and the importance of IPv6. The CANARIE network has been IPv6 enabled now for, I think, 7 years. We've had a big push on in the last little while as we run out of IPv4 addresses. One of the things that we intend to invest in over the next 5 years is helping campus networks transition to IPv6. Over the last 5 years, we work closely with RISQ and other ORANs, other provincial partners, to move the provincial research networks to IPv6. Now, I should just pause here and say RISQ is one of the most advanced networks in Canada. One of the roles that CANARIE plays is to try to provide equality of access to information, to digital infrastructure across Canada. So the RISQ network is an outstanding network. The equivalent in Prince Edward Island, not so outstanding. So one of the roles that CANARIE plays is to make greater investments in the, call them have-not provinces, at least from the perspective of research networking. IPv6 would be an example of that. So I think the RISQ network has been IPv6 enabled for many years now and led the way for the other provincial networks. But there were a number of provincial networks that were still only IPv4 enabled. And over the last couple of years, we've helped them through direct investments move to IPv6. And we'll do the same for all of these areas of our investment over the next 5-year mandate to ensure that every Canadian researcher, whether they're located in Université de Montréal or whether they're located in Memorial University or Saskatoon and the University of Saskatchewan, wherever they are, they have the same access, the same ability to do their research. Canadian Access Federation, I saw Michel had a chart on that, so I won't talk too much about it. This is allowing researchers to move from university to university seamlessly, to have a Wi-Fi connection without having to enter a password or get a new account, and also to be able to access their resources back at their home institution. This is an important initiative that CANARIE has undertaken in the last year with the Canadian, in English, it's a Canadian University, CUCIO is what it stands for. It's a silly acronym. Canadian University CIOs of Canada, I think, or something like Canadian Universities, Canadian whatever, I don't know. So does anybody know? Yeah. Council, that's it. Okay, sorry about that. CUCIO. They should change their name, I think. Just CIOs of Canada. That's it. Canadian University Council of CIOs. Thank you. Good. Another thing that we've done is content peering. Now, again, this is something that RISQ is currently doing. It's available also in Ontario. However, it's not available in any of the other provinces, although in BC they're beginning to do this. So CANARIE is providing content peering for all Canadian partners. It benefits Quebec because we're able to provide higher speed access to some of the content providers. And it's having a profound impact. The content peering reduces the costs at universities of ISP access. It increases the bandwidth available to get, for example, to Amazon or to Google or any of the other content providers. And this is very important, obviously, from a fiscal perspective, but it has side effects that we didn't, well, at least I didn't anticipate. So as an example, we're now hearing that smaller universities like Memorial in Newfoundland have a better opportunity to attract foreign students. Why? What does content peering have to do with foreign students? Well, it turns out that Chinese students, as an example, can now access the resources at Memorial and evaluate them, to look at their website, to see what they're doing in a way that they weren't able to before. This is as a result of both IPv6 and content peering. So there's some interesting social side effects of our research networks. Of course, we want to continue the support for our provincial partners, direct funding for upgrades to the networks, direct funding for programs like the ones we've been talking about here. We want to extend our network to more research institutions. One of the things that CANARIE does is we will fund connections for research institutions that don't otherwise have the budgets to pay for the connections themselves. Now, this is a program that we've been running for a few years and will continue to run. Many of the institutions that we're connecting through this program happen to be government labs. But nonetheless, we intend to continue that program. This won't have a big impact in Montreal because all of the institutions, as I'm aware of, as I believe, are connected in Montreal, but some other institutions in more remote facilities are connected to this program. So as an example, there's a Biological Studies Institute in the Laurentians that we're just connecting now in Saint-Hippolyte through this program. So we want to continue this program over the next 5 years. So that's the first and the most important of the 3 initiatives that we see for the next 5 years. The second one is technology innovation, to continue the investments that I talked about before to allow researchers to access these great services on the research network. Now, as you know, the research network is only one component of digital infrastructure for research and education. Other components include compute, storage, the expertise of people to help you leverage the resources, and software. What we want to do over the next mandate is to leverage some of the investments that we've made in the projects that I described earlier, like CBrain, such that we can provide a single unique platform to allow researchers to access the network with discipline-specific modules, as opposed to what we've currently been doing, which is investing in separate discipline-specific platforms. So this is a major initiative that we're proposing over the next 5 years. We would do it in collaboration with our partners like RISQ, and we would do it in collaboration with other international research networks like Internet2 or ESNet or Géant. So technology innovation, allowing researchers to access the network, is a key component of our plan for the next 5 years. Now, if you remember at the beginning of my presentation, I said 98% of what we're doing is to increase research efficiency, and 2% is targeted towards increasing stimulating the ICT sector. In the last year, we started a pilot, which is called DARE, the Digital Accelerator for Innovation and Research, specifically targeted at accelerating the ICT sector. So first, I want to tell you why we would do this. Apart from the fact that it's part of our mandate, it's what the government has created CANARIE to do, there's some startling facts about the ICT industry in Canada. You're probably familiar with most of them, but they're really quite shocking. This chart shows ICT investments, VC investments, so venture capital investments over the last few years. And as you can see, it's been declining. If we showed that against US investments on a per capita basis, Canadian investments are about half of the US investments. They both declined after the dot-com meltdown. The US has recovered, Canada has not. Some other facts, in the last decade, Canada's share of ICT exports of all OECD countries has dropped from 2.8% to 1.9%. So we're actually losing ground internationally. This is a real problem. Now, the good news is we're largely a resource economy. The bad news is that, as I think we all know, success for economies like Canada in the future will depend on our ability to innovate. And a component of that is in this segment, the ICT segment. So what can we do about that? Well, the DARE pilot program that we've created and that we want to continue to invest in over the next 5 years provides a cloud computing environment for small and medium-sized companies to help them get their products to market faster. It basically reduces the barrier to entry for those companies. I won't go into too much detail about this. If you're interested in it, there's lots of information on our website. There are a number of Quebec companies currently using the DARE pilot, and we want to make it available to them in the next 5 years as well. What we want to do, though, in the next 5 years is extend the pilot to multinational companies and to universities. So universities, the argument here is that we want to help ICT researchers commercialize their technology. I think that's important. Multinationals may not seem obvious why we would want to help multinationals because they're not Canadian-based, but they invest in Canada. So the objective here is to increase direct foreign investment in Canada, to encourage companies like Sienna, for example, to increase the number of researchers that they have, or to encourage companies like IBM to attract more mandates to Canada, again, to increase their investments, which will benefit our ICT economy as a whole. So that's the third platform. All three of these platforms represent not so much a big change for CANARIE, but an evolution of our investments, an evolution of our activities. We want to continue to evolve the digital infrastructure to support scientific research, and as a secondary benefit, support education and innovation in Canada. We want to lead technology innovation to allow researchers to leverage these assets without having to be digital experts, without having to be networking gurus. And we want to accelerate digital research and stimulate the ICT economy through leveraging the network that we have and targeted investments through the DARE platform that I just described. But, as you know, the federal fiscal environment is quite challenging. The Conservative government has set an objective of eliminating the deficit by 2015. Right now, they're looking at any opportunity to cut costs. So, as we move forward with our process of renewing our mandate for the next 5 years, there's always a risk that our budget will be cut. So what would happen if our budget was cut? Well, it would mean that these investments that I've been talking about would be curtailed. We would reduce those investments. Some of those investments can go away without necessarily damaging our economy in the short term, but in the long term, it will have a negative impact, of course. Some of them can't go away. The demand for the network resources isn't going to go away. We need to build out the network. If we don't have the resources to fund the national network from our federal government, it will mean that we won't have the resources to provide the connectivity that all of our provinces require. Ultimately, it would be a form of downloading to the provincial governments or to the universities. So I think it's in all of our interests to try to encourage the federal government to see the value of research networking at the national level and to make an investment in CANARIE to renew the mandate. So this is my last slide, and it's my call to action. If you believe that the CANARIE network and the proposed investments that we're going to be making over the next 5 years has value to you, you can actually have an impact on the federal government's decision to renew our mandate. One of the things that surprised me in the role that I currently have is just how important voices like ours are to the decision-making process at the federal level. They don't make a decision purely on the basis of logic alone. They also make a decision based on the demonstrated support of the proposed investments. So You might think that sending a letter wouldn't have a big impact, but I can assure you it will. So if you think the CANARIE's mandate for the next 5 years is a worthwhile federal investment, I would strongly encourage you, in fact, I'd go so far as to beg you, please send a letter. Send a letter to your MP, send a letter, copy this at the same time, the same letter to Prime Minister Harper and to Finance Minister Flaherty. Make your institution's leadership aware of what we're trying to do and ask them to do the same thing. If you want a little bit of help writing the letter, a template, for example, we've got a bunch of information on our website. This sounds crass, begging you to write a letter, but I can't overstate how much of a positive impact it will have on our initiative. So if you can, please do write a letter and contribute to our efforts to renewing CANARIE's mandate. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, merci beaucoup. Est-ce que j'ai du son? Oui. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. Alors, nous allons... est-ce qu'il y a des questions pour M. Roche? On a une question ici, on va aller à l'avant. Oui, on s'excuse, on va remettre le micro. On a une question ici.
Yes.
Yeah, hi,
Allez-y, on vous écoute.
Hi.
Hi, it's Gary Bernstein from McGill University.
Hi, Gary.
What's happening with the Canadian Access Federation? CANARIE took responsibility for this, I think, a little bit more than a year ago. We don't seem to see any movement, and we have a number of service providers who wish to join but don't know how and haven't got any support.
Oh, I'm disappointed to hear that. We've made significant investments in the Canadian Access Federation. We've hired 3 people, actually, in support of that. From a business development, I guess from our perspective, it's business development. From your perspective, it's a service provision point of view. The person to contact is, well, it's on our website. It's Walter Stewart. We are very actively involved in promoting and supporting the Canadian Access Federation. We're signing up new institutions on a regular basis. I think today, Catherine, do you remember how many people we currently have? How many institutions we have? It's around 40 institutions, I think, around that on the Access Federation. Our objective is to get it up to 60 before the end of the current mandate. So we hope to sign up 20 additional institutions over the next 6 months.
The last time that I visited your website was just after the CANARIE AGM, and
Okay.
there was absolutely no information on how a service provider could join the Federation. No.
Well, again, I apologize. Very disappointed to hear that. I'd encourage you to take another look.
Okay.
And if the information isn't there, please contact me directly, and I'll ensure that it is there. But I think it is. It's jim.roach@canarie.ca.
Okay. The other question I have concerns cyber infrastructure. Do you think that CANARIE is going to get into you know, a large, very green Canadian data center at any time in the near future? Massive, you know, like 20 to 40 megawatts?
That's a great question. That is not part of our mandate renewal proposal to Industry Canada. Is it possible that CANARIE would participate in something like that? Absolutely. However, probably more from a networking perspective than anything else. Would we invest in a data center like that? Not with our current mandate and not under the extension that I'm proposing here. However, if the federal government sees value in this and wants to invest in it, CANARIE would be in one vehicle that they could use. Compute Canada would be another vehicle that they could use to do that. And we would work with partners to move that proposal through Industry Canada, partners like Cuccio, Compute Canada, and others.
And the last question also concerns cyber infrastructure. The small, medium business cloud support, specifically storage cloud.
Yep.
How scalable is that going to be able to support massive amounts of storage on, you know, for university, both researchers and administrative use?
Yeah, there's a real problem in cyber infrastructure or digital infrastructure in Canada, a big gap in our ability to store and curate research data. The proposal that we have to support small and medium-sized enterprises and ultimately MNEs and universities, DARE, is not intended to scale up to solve that problem. So CANARIE is not currently positioning itself to solve the problem of data storage. But it falls in the same class of the question that you just asked a second ago. Right now, we're not hearing from the federal government that they see this as a high priority, even though I think everyone in the room that's involved in research would see this as a high priority. What we need to do is raise the visibility of this, and there's a lot of activities underway right now to do just that, to convince the federal government that this is something that is worthy of investment. With that, then CANARIE would work with partners like the same ones, Compute Canada, Cuccio, CKRN, and Carl, to bring a proposal together to fund a national data center for research data storage and curation. But right now, in today's current environment and with this funding mandate renewal proposal that I just articulated, that is not part of our plan.
Okay, thanks.
Good questions, thank you. Do we have time for any more?
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Est-ce qu'on a des questions en ligne?
Thank you very much.